Hello, fellow freethinkers, and welcome to episode 302 of Freethought Friday. In this episode, you will hear the second part of our two-part interview with Atheist Ireland chairperson Michael Nugent. Enjoy.
When you are studying any matter or considering any philosophy, ask yourself only what are the facts and what is the truth that the facts bear out.
Science is more than a body of knowledge. It's a way of thinking, a way of skeptically interrogating the universe. If we are not able to ask skeptical questions, to be skeptical of those in authority, then we're up for grabs.
In all of science, we're looking for a balance between data and theory. You don't have to delude yourself with irony and fairy tales.
The same spiritual fulfillment that people find in religion can be found in science by coming to know, if you will, the mind of God.
The real world, as it actually is not evil. It's remarkable. And the way to understand the physical world is to use science.
There is a new wave of reason sweeping across America, Britain, Europe, Australia, South America, the Middle East and Africa. There is a new wave of reason where superstition had a firm hold. Teach a man to reason and think for a lifetime. Think for a lifetime.
So speaking of that, Islamophobia, don't you just hate all Muslims? I mean, isn't that really what this is about?
Yeah, in it one straight. I think
let's definitely we need to talk about this one. And again, it's one that myself and Rob have discussed a couple of times in passing, but I think it's very, very important that we have this conversation and we're very clear about what we're trying to say.
Well, can I just give a little bit of context? Because the Islamophobia thing came up before you wrote your 5 list. It came up on your review of the year on Twitter. Someone called you out on your review of the year that Atheist Ireland and yourself were stayed silent of there was no critical of Islam after the Paris attacks. And that conversation kind of went as it went along. You tweeted, "I reject the idea of Islamophobia. It is a made-up propaganda term that conflates Islam and Muslim." And then later on you tweeted, "In current context, it is a political propaganda term that's aimed at silencing criticism of Islam." So would that pretty much sum up your thinking on it?
Yeah, that Islam is an ideology. It's more than a religion in terms of what we normally consider religion in Western democratic societies. It's closer to what Christianity would have been at the time of, say, the Holy Roman Empire or whatever. Islam is a combination of a religious, political, judicial, military, social governance that in many cases where they're in a majority is imposed by force. It has, as has any ideology, it has a lot of good things. There are a lot of good things in the in the Ciarán and the Hadith about treating people well, and equally there's a lot of bad things about that husbands can beat their wives in circumstances that you should chop off the hands of thieves, that if women's evidence is considered less than a man's evidence, women get less inheritance than a man. There's a whole range of things that in a normal society, and that's even not counting the bits about killing infidels. There's a whole load of things that in normal society, democratic society, religions would have evolved beyond that, and people would have found, as Christians have done, would have found ways to rationalise away the stone a man to death for gathering sticks on the Sabbath. But that hasn't happened with Islam, because Islam is still in control of many societies, or Islamists are in control of many societies. And ironically enough, in terms of those who say we shouldn't criticise Islam and that criticism of Islam is Islamophobic and is insulting to Muslims, most of the victims of Islamist human rights abuses are Muslims. if you're a woman Muslim, if you're a gay Muslim, if you're an Ahmadi Muslim in virtually any society, if you're a Shia Muslim in a Sunni Muslim state, or vice versa, those are the people who are primarily the victims of the human rights abuses that derive from Islamist ideology. And so I think it's not only is criticizing and opposing Islam, not only is it not being offensive to Muslims, it's actually supportive of Muslims who are the victims of that. And the phrase Islamophobia is a kind of conflation phrase that by using Islam as the key term within it, as opposed to Muslim, and then by then saying in a kind of bait and switch, it's hatred or distrust of Islam and Muslims. It kind of conflates the two issues, and when you're legitimately critical of Islam in order to protect Muslims and others from Islam, you're accused of being disrespectful to Muslims, whereas actually it's the opposite.
Are you not just being critical? You're calling it Islamophobia, but are you not just being critical of another culture, that it just isn't white Western culture?
Oh, I'm very critical of that culture. I don't believe that all cultures are ethically equal. I think a culture where women are treated as second-class citizens should be criticised. And I'm quite happy to say that on the basis of morality, that it's nothing to do with gods, and on the basis of compassion and empathy and fairness and justice, that Islamic societies are worse for people than our ethical secular democracies. I'm quite happy to have that discussion and say that Islam is not good for a society.
I think there's certainly plenty of evidence that supports that, and no doubt it's an evidence-based conclusion that
Yeah.
I mean,
and that's not critical of Muslims. I completely respect the right of Muslims to believe what they want to believe, to manifest their beliefs as long as they're not infringing on the rights of other people. And if people do get comfort from some of the good things that are inherent in Islamic theology, then that's obviously a good thing. But because it is associated with not only harmful but just murderous attributes, it's quite important that we remain free to criticise the harmful aspects of the ideology while respecting the individual people who, for whatever reason, happen to believe in Islam.
I feel for balance I should be channeling Ben Affleck at this point and say you're just a racist, Michael, obviously.
And a cultural supremacist.
Yes, basically. So
it's again, this is one of the kind of weird things about people who criticise criticism of Islam, is the idea that Islam is a race. If it's something that you can change your mind about, then it's not a race. You can't just suddenly decide to be a different race, and it's another part of the conflation. It's trying to close down criticism with completely illegitimate associations and baits and switches and so on. That if you, crudely speaking, break the world into the traditional races that people believe to be the main races, there are Muslims within all of those races. And you can't tell by looking at somebody whether their race indicates what their religion is. So I think that's just a distraction, and it's probably on a par with Islamophobia as an attempt to close down legitimate discussion.
So, just couple. You say it's a political.
I hear you're a racist now,
I
Father.
hear you're a racist now. You say it's a political propaganda term. Who do you think is putting it out there as political propaganda? Who's behind using this term as political propaganda?
I think it probably evolved. I mean, there was a paper by a group called the Runnymede Trust in England back in the 90s that was examining the word Islamophobia. It was examining prejudice against Muslims in Britain. and it came up with a lot of examples to show that there was at that time a lot of prejudice against Muslims in Britain, and that it should be challenged, and of course it should be challenged. And because in that case a lot of the Muslims in Britain wouldn't have been indigenous British Muslims, they would have been immigrants from various other countries, it did become conflated with ethnicity and race in some cases. And so I think that was an important initiative, and it was trying to identify how do you challenge that prejudice. But the word that they used in that report, which ended up being quite a significant development in the use of the word Islamophobia, they used the word Islamophobia to describe that phenomenon. Now, they accepted even within their report that the word wasn't ideal and that it did make those conflations, but they said, well, it's a useful word to use anyway, so we're going to use it. And so the word Islamophobia, it had been used a bit before then, but that was the first, proper academic analysis that used the word. Now, it then around the same time started to be used as well by the Islamic states at the United Nations. And the Islamic states at the United Nations were trying to prevent, first of all, they were trying to defend their own laws against blasphemy, or in their case apostasy as well, if somebody leaves Islam, where people would be killed, and where there would be execution as a legal penalty, and where there would be cases, and this is particularly rife in Pakistan, where people would have just a row with their neighbours, and somebody would accuse somebody of blasphemy against Muhammad, and a mob would come to attack that person's house. The police would arrive. Instead of protecting that person, they would just arrest them and charge them with blasphemy. And you now have, for example, in Pakistan, there's a woman called Asia Bibi, a Christian woman still facing execution for the last few years for blasphemy against Muhammad, and 2 politicians who spoke out in her favour were murdered, one murdered by his own bodyguard. So and when you try to criticise any of those things, you're told you're Islamophobic. Now, the Islamic states, as well as trying to defend their own blasphemy laws, were trying to spread through the Organisation of Islamic States at the United Nations, were trying to spread laws against what they variously called Islamophobia, defamation of religion, defamation of Islam, and various concepts like that. And ironically enough, when Ireland passed our blasphemy law in 2010, they started using some of the wording of our blasphemy law as what they were trying to get implemented internationally. So and they would be going to the United Nations and saying, we need these laws in order to protect Muslims, and in order to protect the sensibilities of Muslims. And then they would go back to their own Organisation of Islamic State meetings and say, this is what we've been doing about Islamophobia. So it is being used as a political tool in both of those contexts. I would say that the Runnymede report and the Islamic states at the United Nations have been the most prolific users, and then it's kind of strayed into the current obsession that some people have with identity politics, where you don't address issues on the basis of the content of the ideas, you address it on the basis of what tribe is the person involved in and what tribe is the person seemingly arguing against. And Islamophobia is a great little word to throw in there as well. And the other part about it as well, which I actually have a problem with this in terms of the use of the phrase homophobia as well. I think using the word phobia and even implying, if not saying, that there's an element of some sort of mental illness involved in the opinion, I think is wrong.
Because phobia by definition is a psychological fear of something.
Yeah,
is that correct?
and an irrational
fear of something.
Yeah,
right. I think I would agree. I know, and I discussed with Rob the idea of when Pantygate as an issue came up. Again, I was kind of arguing, let's talk about homophobic ideas again, even with the problematic word, rather than homophobic people. Again, to try and separate the concepts, whatever they may be, from the people who are expressing them. With Islamophobia. So you were saying that you don't think it's a real word, and I suppose I I'm going to say I agree and I disagree. I do agree with you, your take on it, that it probably isn't. Certainly in the context it's being used, or in many of the contexts in which I've read it being used, it's always that conflation. I would take a leaf out of my mathematician's book, and that is at the beginning of any discussion on this, or in fact of anything, for terms that it could in any way be misinterpreted, I'd say let's at the top of the discussion we're going to define these words and start the discussion like that to get the discussion going on. Well, what are we meaning if we're going to use this word? And if we can't agree, then we agree not to use it, and we'll use a different word to describe the various concepts.
Yeah, except that could be easily addressed by saying criticism of Islam as one concept and prejudice against Muslims as another. So if you use those terms, it's quite easy, but you'll find that a lot of people won't want to use those terms because they want to conflate the two things.
Yeah.
But isn't it the case that the word is Islam, as in going back to Pantygate with homophobia, you know, as Panty said, it's a neat Orwellian trick. We now have the homophobes telling us what homophobia is. Yeah. Isn't it the case now with Islamophobia that it's the word that the Muslim community have chosen themselves to describe their experiences of prejudice against them? So surely it's their word to use.
If they want to use a word to describe what they experience, that's fine. But what they're doing is using a word to describe what they say other people are experiencing. As in, they're saying that other people are homophobic. They're not saying that they are some word or other. They're saying you are homophobic.
Or so they're trying to
or Islamophobic. They're trying to attribute something to another person's thinking rather than to their own.
But isn't that what's happening with the word homophobia? No one
argues
against that. They say, you know, if you treat someone because of their sexual orientation in any way that removes some of their human rights, then you are a homophobe.
Yeah. Well, I don't use that phrase. I have the same problems with homophobe as I do with Islamophobe.
So Panty was wrong.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. I wasn't entirely happy with the way. I mean, I know there was lack of clarity there, but I don't like the word either. But I certainly would argue that if you're going to go down that route, say you're talking about the concept, and then you're right, you're probably going to use other phrases like discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or whatever. I don't like any of these words that identify people. Because even just from an evidence, from a scientific definition point of view, I don't know what it means to be a homophobe or an Islamophobe. Do you, like, for a homophobe, do you have to be insulting to gays 5 times a week every week for 7 weeks in a row? I don't know what the definition is. I think it's
not like the praying 5 times.
Well, this is what I mean. I think it's much.
Only if you're really committed to it.
Yeah. You have to be a homophobe 24/7, and I think the same is true of many terms when we're trying to talk about actually maybe a behaviour as opposed to the individual. So irrespective of even the term that's being used, even the problematic nature, as you said, of phobia, never mind Islamophobia or whatever, then I think
maybe homophobes have to kneel down 5 times a day and face the Iona office.
Well, whatever they might be doing when they're kneeling down and facing the Iona office, we probably can get into that discussion another time. But so what would you suggest we do in relation to like this? The term is used, I see more and more in articles in the media, in mainstream media that I might read as opposed to maybe a blog post or whatever else. Do you think we can try to encourage even mainstream media to be clearer on what concept it is that they're trying to
yeah, it's like language is all part of a process. I mean, language evolves, and homophobia is being used, and indeed it has made its way into some dictionary definitions. You know, so I mean, there's no doubt that it is becoming accepted and established. So the task is to try and change that for those of us that think that it's a harmful word. And in anything, I mean, dictionaries follow usage; they don't determine meanings of words. And so we've got to have more people using phrases like criticism of Islam and prejudice against Muslims as distinct words and phrases, and not conflating them into the phrase Islamophobia. And the more people that do that, the more likely it is that will become accepted as the norm. In the same way as just over the years, the meaning of the word atheist has changed. I mean, atheist used to have associations of being not just amoral, but being immoral and wicked. And now that's considered anachronistic, in the same way as the word gay has had, was used as an insult, was then adopted essentially by the gay community, and then the meaning of that word changed. So that's always in flux, and I'm always optimistic that in the long term that reason will prevail, and that we will be able to disentangle the two concepts that are currently used in that word.
Okay.
Just on that being the number one, working our way up the list, someone tweeted, "Are you serious? Is this really the number one challenge for atheists and secularists in 2016?
Well, it is number one on the charts. What can you do?
So you stand by that? You do think it's the greatest challenge we face in 2016?
I think it is symbolically. It's probably the most important. It captures a lot of the other ones within it. Obviously to a certain extent, they're arbitrary in terms of the order in which they're put, and they're all important. But it symbolically, I do think that it encompasses treating people fairly. It encompasses human rights. It encompasses ethical secular democracy. So I'm quite happy to leave it at number one.
Leave it in. I suppose it does worry me because I spend far too much time on Facebook, but I do see a lot of people sharing articles, newspaper articles, HuffPost, whatever, where there are discussions on Islam, and invariably there will be someone in the comments who will share something from Britain First, who'll share something that's out and out racist, and it doesn't happen often enough that they're called out on it, and I just think that the two issues are so muddied. The criticism of Islam and racism are just so muddied at the moment. It really is.
Yeah. So the task then is to disentangle them. And when somebody is talking about Islam and somebody says that's racist, then the task is to say no, it's not racist. It's nothing to do with race.
I wonder if there's. It's something that Sam Harris has alluded to, and I would agree with. I think his analysis on this. We're afraid, especially those of us who might be, I'm dubious about using the term liberal, but broadly speaking, liberal for me anyway. We're afraid to criticise cultures other than our own for fear of being conflated with racism or colonialism or whatever else, when indeed there is a legitimate evidence-based reasoning why such criticisms are valid and should indeed be expressed and with great passion. And I think that broader discussion, which he has pulled up several times, this I think he's called it. Well, he's using this phrase "regressive left." I'm not sure if that's necessarily helpful, but I do think that broader discussion of being willing to criticise culture, cultural ideas, should be encouraged, so long as we're doing it on an evidence-based premise. And I think we're still afraid to do that, because I think many people are probably afraid, well, then we might have to turn the spotlight on our own culture and then reveal things that we don't like there.
Well, I don't know. Look, I've spent all my life criticising the culture that I live in, because I see the flaws much more immediately, because I'm living through them. I spent a lot of my time campaigning against the IRA and the loyalist paramilitaries in Northern Ireland. I spent my time campaigning against the influence of the Catholic Church in Ireland generally, and in conjunction with that, when I was younger, would have campaigned against apartheid in South Africa, would have campaigned on international issues as well. So I don't think there's any contradiction in seeing the problems in the culture that you live in and spending most of your time, because you have to in practical terms, spend most of your time trying to affect change in the society in which you live, but also taking positions on and trying to affect change on a wider context, because we do live in an increasingly interdependent world where people in other countries are depending on us to help to protect their human rights.
I suppose just to give you the final word on that, people will have been criticising you on Twitter, on Facebook, on your blog, and saying, you're just expressing anti-Muslim sentiment. I'm assuming that you accept that there is people who are anti-Muslim out there. There's a new group has started up and are having some kind of a rally on O'Connell Street on Saturday, and I know there's a counter protest. Peggy,
they're a German group.
German group. I mean, I assume you accept that there are people out there who don't want immigrants coming in from Muslim countries that are anti-Muslim.
Of course there are. There's one of them called Donald Trump.
There is.
So
you're not for a second arguing that there's no such thing as anti-Muslim sentiment and prejudice against
No, of course
Muslims.
not. And I'm saying and further than that, I'm saying that should be challenged and tackled. But what I'm saying is that that the word Islamophobia is used to conflate that with something else, which is legitimate criticism of Islam, and so obviously that there are there's prejudice against Muslims, just as there's prejudice against different races, just as there's prejudice against different people of different sexualities, just as all sorts of prejudice in Irish society and in Western society generally. But there is, I mean, let's given the context of recent times, in Germany, there are also influences on the broadly Western liberal democratic culture in which we live and which we've gradually evolved in Western Europe. That there are influences on that from having large influxes of people with a different attitude to human rights and to the rights of women than we have built up in Western Europe over the time. So again, we can't just ignore that either. There's a range of different interdependent and interreacting influences, and so it's all very complicated. I'm not saying it's simple by any means, but the more that we can disentangle the different factors and address them individually, rather than when you're addressing one of them have somebody shout something about the other and often throw in "you fuckhead" as part of the argument, that just makes it more difficult to address them.
Which strangely segues us directly into the last bit.
Talking about being a fuckhead and then also being an Islamist. You recently wrote a blog post in relation to Richard Dawkins and an invitation that was rescinded of his or rescinded from him to, was it the NECSS, is that correct?
NECSS is the Northeastern Conference on Science and Skepticism. It's a conference that's been run for the past few years, organised jointly by the New York City Skeptics and the New England Skeptical Society, the latter being, as I understand it, essentially the people who run Skeptics Guide to the Universe podcast. So they had invited Richard to speak at their conference this year, which I think is coming up in May, and they announced him as a speaker.
And tickets had gone on sale.
Tickets had gone on sale, although it was only a couple of days, but it had just been announced. So then Richard retweeted a video that somebody had posted on the internet, which was a satirical YouTube animated video of a song that suggested that Islamists and feminists shared a certain way of using language to close down conversations, and it kind of compared the patriarchy and misogyny with haram and un-Islamic and so on, or un-Quranic, and so that video, Richard shared that video along with a description saying, obviously this doesn't apply to the vast majority of feminists, of whom I count myself, but there is a small minority that's pernicious. And so that was shared, and
with his million plus
followers, on Twitter. And there was some people were, as is quite common, critical of Richard for posting that, and one of the people pointed out to him that one of the characters in the video, which was an animated caricature of what I had assumed, and looking at it, was just a caricature of a radical feminist, turned out to be a real person that had previously been involved in an incident where she had been shouting at people while she was protesting at another event. She had got some harassment online and threats based on that. That was brought to Richard's attention. Richard said, "Okay, well then, now that's been brought to my attention, I'll delete the video." But independently of that, the any CSS withdrew his invitation to speak at that conference. And that caused another round of controversy. And I have taken the position on that the NECSS should park that decision, have a discussion with Richard. They didn't even contact him before withdrawing the invitation, and then revisit the decision again after that. I think they're quite entitled to decide not to invite Richard to their conference, or indeed to invite anybody to their conference. But I think once you have invited somebody, you have in effect entered into an agreement, and you shouldn't unilaterally break that agreement on the basis of what somebody posts on Twitter.
So we've had a number of instances now where groups, university societies, or have uninvited people after protest. I think in the more recent ones, in my memory anyway, the protests have usually come from outside, certainly, of the secular or atheist community. In this case, it seems that there was some protest from within our community.
Yeah.
And that then influenced the unilateral decision that was made. Is this something again that we need to be talking about in a rational way?
Yeah, well, if you take some of the other examples, Mariam Namazi being banned from Warwick University and also from Trinity College Dublin. More recently, I was banned banned is uninvited is the current buzz phrase. I was uninvited from speaking to a Catholic school that I've been asked to speak at. And now the interesting thing when you talk about it in terms of the current uninviting and criticism coming from within the supposedly rational atheist and secular and sceptical communities, is that Warwick University and Trinity College Dublin and the Catholic school that uninvited me, on consideration, all withdrew their uninvitations and decided to honour their original invitation. So I would hope that the NESEC
so you were uninvited
would follow. Oh, exactly. I was uninvited. Would follow the example of these, supposedly more conservative, less rational bodies, and just. I won't even use the word reinstate. The way I would phrase it is just honour the original agreement that they made. I would have had no problem with them not inviting Richard if they haven't invited him.
If they didn't want to do it in the first place.
Yes. But once you invite somebody, you've in effect created an agreement. Certainly if you've publicised it.
Certainly if you've sold. I didn't realise tickets had been sold, and I know, the name would probably have been a draw for many people. I know it would have been a draw for me, and if I had bought tickets and then been told that this
well, they did say that you could get your money back.
Right.
But it's not even the selling of tickets. It's the principle of entering into an agreement that you're going to do something.
Yeah, but I think we're glossing over a big chunk of the issue on this. I mean, the part of the issue was the fact that the video that he tweeted, that a lot of people felt that it crossed the line, that it went into the realm of hate speech, that it was quite insulting towards this woman and put her in a position where she had already come under a lot of attack on social media, including claims that she had received both death and rape threats, and had now his 1 million odd followers had been alerted to her presence again, and he was opening up a floodgate for more abuse and attacks.
Once that was brought to his attention, he deleted the video. Very few people knew. I'm pretty clued in with all of this internet drama and the atheist community over recent years, and I wasn't aware that was that person. Nobody seems concerned in the slightest that the Islamist character is also based on a real person. So I think that's a bit disingenuous. I think if it was the case that first of all, I'm not sure I entirely agree with that argument anyway, but let's grant that argument for the sake of the discussion. If you accept that argument, and if Richard had said afterwards, well, I don't care, I hate her, and so I'm going to keep it up on my Twitter account, then you might have some argument on that.
But he did say that, obviously death threats, not good, abuse, not good, but he did say it's okay to mock her and go after her, and he said, and mock her a lot.
Yeah, well, no, you've just thrown in and go after her there.
Well, that's the way people can interpret it.
Exactly, and they're wrong. Because the context in which he said that was people were saying, were suggesting that he was supporting the threats and harassment. And the context he was saying, no, mocking is okay, but certainly not harassment, and don't harass her, and it's outrageous. And mocking is okay.
But there could be a very thin line between mocking and harassing. I mean, where does the line mocking end and then you cross into harassment?
Well,
I mean,
have you mocked anybody?
If I mock you mercilessly over a number of hours, it then becomes harassment.
Well, again, I think we're back to, are you mocking the ideas being expressed by the individual, or are you mocking the individual for expressing
her
them?
claims were, and the claims that I've read online were that she had come under personal attack.
We don't. No, that's not the case. She hasn't said anything that I'm aware of about this. People on her behalf have been saying that during the previous incident, when she had been videoed screaming at people, that she had received threats after that. I don't think anybody has been suggesting, or at least I haven't seen it, that she received threats because of Richard's retweeting of the video.
It's an annoying song, and just because I hate
it's a
everybody,
great song.
I will allow the audience to determine that, because I'm going to link it in with our video or with our podcast, so you will get to hear it whether you want to or not. Well, yeah. I suppose you can always
look. Here's the thing. Even if you do want to go down the road of suggesting that it implies hate, which I don't think it does, but let's say even if you go down that, if you look at Tom Lehrer's song about National Brotherhood Week, which includes the lines, "Oh, the white folks hate the black folks, and the black folks hate the white folks," and includes, and the Catholics hate the Protestants, and the Protestants hate the Catholics, and everybody hates the Jews. I mean, people in terms of putting repulsive ideas in the mouths of fictional characters is part of satire. It doesn't mean that it's approving of that. In fact, it means the opposite in the context of satire.
Do you not think that this is just another attack on feminists in the atheist community?
No, it's nothing to do with the atheist community. I mean, it was to do with comparing some of the language usage of some minority of feminists with some of the language tactics used by Islamists. Atheism didn't come into it at all.
Well, it did, because it was retweeted by Richard Dawkins. So, I mean, if something's retweeted by Richard Dawkins, it's going out to the atheist community.
It could have been going to the evolutionary biology community. Maybe evolutionary biologists really want to know about the commonality.
Yeah, and the social commentary on it is all coming in from the atheist community.
Yeah, but I mean, that doesn't nothing. Just because you are a community that is gathered around a particular thing doesn't mean that everything that you discuss is inherently viewed through the prism of your atheism. I mean, most of the context of the discussions that are supporting it aren't even supporting the video. Most of the people who are supporting the right of freedom of expression, even for ideas that you disagree with. So, I mean, I would go further. I don't actually have a problem with the video, but most of the people who are supporting Richard are retweeting it are saying we do have a problem with the video, but we still think that he should have the right to retweet it.
Do you think, Ashling, maybe the best solution here is to chop off Richard Dawkins' arms and then close down his Twitter account, because he just shouldn't be allowed to use Twitter?
Back away from the Twitter account. I think that, I think there's a number of different points that I've spoken to different people about this, and I got in touch with a few people who, like Richard Dawkins, identify as feminists, and I've asked them their opinion on this. And I suppose the couple of things have kind of been said to me. One of them is this assumption that the woman who's portrayed, I'm going to call her Big Red. I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I've been told that's a name she uses for herself. Mm-hmm. She calls herself Big Red. That she's a radical feminist, and people are immediately backing away, saying, "Oh, that's not my brand of feminism. That she doesn't represent me. So therefore, it's okay to go out and mock her mercilessly." because she's the other type of feminist.
Yeah.
And a few people have said to me, this is why we have a problem in atheism with women not engaging. We've fewer women involved in the atheist movement because they feel that they have to be a certain type of feminist or else they will be mocked by the men within the community. So that's one of the points of views that has been put to me.
Right. And do we know? I don't know if we can gather statistics on this. Is it mostly men who have mocked this, or?
I don't know.
I feel maybe solution is too strong a word to use here, but I feel the direction we can go in is tackling the ideas, whatever. I don't know the definition of radical feminism, so the first question that pops into mind is, I don't know what that is. Define it for me, and let's talk about the ideas in it.
Then that's is there such a thing as radical feminism, or are we just othering? Are we just saying are radical feminists just women who aren't behaving in the way that we want them to behave? They're being shouty and loud and sweary, so let's mock them.
No, well, there's the distinction. I mean, if you look at what she was saying on the original video that she was speaking in, most of what she's saying was quite reasonable. You know, she was what she was actually saying was, you people who support men's rights, here's a load of things that you're looking for, and we actually agree with you. We think that these things should happen, and we agree that they are problems, and irrespective of whether she was a feminist or a capitalist or a communist or any whatever it was she was conveying, if you convey even reasonable ideas by screaming fuckface into somebody's face every 2 seconds, then you're going to be mocked for that, not for the content of what she said. I doubt that anybody even, I mean, I made a point of trying to listen to what she was saying, I feel that what she was saying was quite reasonable. I also had a look at a video of the start of the whole thing's 2.5 hours long, but there's a video of the actual event inside that was being protested against.
This is not the video Richard.
No, this is the original
on
thing.
This is a video of Big Red protesting, and this is how she became somewhat notorious, and this is why she began to receive the abuse.
So certainly, and I won't go any further than saying that the first 15 minutes or so, which was all I had time to look at, because I intend to look at the rest of it later, of what was said at the meeting itself seemed reasonable as well. So
this was what's been put out there as an MRA meeting.
It's
a pro-rape men's rights group.
Well, again, there's a huge conflation pro-rape men's rights. I mean, it was a meeting of promoting men's rights by an organisation called the Canadian Association for Equality, which includes men and women in its board and its spokespersons, and the idea of just automatically conflating that with being misogynistic or pro-rape is in itself an assumption that needs to be examined rather than just made and accepted.
But hasn't there been some evidence that this guy Rush V, who's having some kind of thing in Nace on Saturday, I think it is.
You have to ask about the pet store or something.
You have to ask where the pet store is or something. Yeah. And no women and no homosexuals are allowed to turn up. And my way of protesting that would be, I'd have all the women turn up in beards, and it would be like the Life of Brian, you know. But isn't there? Hasn't
even
there been,
if you say Jehovah?
Even if you say Jehovah, but hasn't there been links made between this cafe, I think this group, and his group?
No, there haven't. There have been people saying that there are links, but there's been no evidence of actual links, and both of them have disassociated themselves from the other.
Okay.
So I mean, again, there's this constant conflation of, and this, I bring this back to the whole identity politics thing. There's this constant conflation. If somebody says something, then you associate it with somebody else that they've once had a cup of coffee with, and then you associate that with somebody else that their grandmother said, and suddenly everything is merged together, as if every individual is responsible for everything that all the other individuals in this supposed chain of association have said or done.
It was only a couple of hours ago, before we started recording, I just put up on Facebook that we were going to be doing this discussion this evening. There's been a huge amount of discussion on your Facebook page, on your blog, on Twitter. It's a lot of retweets. So there's a huge interest in this. I just asked, had anyone any questions that they wanted to ask Michael? So if it's okay, I'll just... Someone on Facebook just asked, does Michael think that feminism has become irreconcilable with liberal intersectional... with liberal values, which emphasise individuals, whereas intersectional feminism emphasises group identities?
Well, I think it's all a balance. I mean, I think feminism is a good thing. I think feminism is something I support. I'm a feminist. I've always been a feminist, and I support equality between the sexes. Now, I would come from a liberal perspective. I think that that human rights belong to individuals, and that the idea of collective rights taking precedence over individual rights is wrong, and in fact is counterproductive to human rights. So I think if you try to conflate things together to the extent that you say that that all of any category of people share a certain type of attributes, whether it's all men or all women or all feminists or all men's rights activists or all black people or all white people or all anything, then I think you're going to both remove the nuance that you need to discuss the different attitudes that different people have, and you're also just going to create a mess legislatively by passing laws that infringe on individual human rights.
Okay, so someone else has asked, what is the cause of the move by previously secular groups here and abroad towards blocking free speech, most especially in universities? Thinking particularly of the behaviour of both the LGBT and feminist societies at Goldsmiths in supporting the Islamic Society in disrupting the talk by Miriam Namazi, and then turning on the atheist secular groups as an example. And I suppose that feeds directly into the content of the video, which people aren't really talking about, the whole thing that there is somehow a shared comparison in the ideologies between the feminist and the Islamist.
Yeah, well, I think the video probably would have been more complete if they had added into it a third character based on P.Z. Myers saying, no, yeah, I'm an atheist. Because I think the problem does exist within the atheist community as well. I mean, there's just a tendency, I think, today, and I think it's possibly to do with the impersonal nature of communication online to a certain extent, that people forget that they're dealing with people, and they think in the same ways you can just turn off your computer, or you can just block somebody on the internet or something like that. It's sort of channeled into real life. Well, okay, we'll block them from having their discussion, we'll block them from having their meeting and so on. I think it's outrageous, to be honest. I think no matter what you feel about people's beliefs, they have a right to express them, and quite often it'll be quite contradictory, and you'll have one group of people blocking another group of people on the other side while complaining when the same thing happens to them. So I think regardless of what you believe, you should respect people's rights to discuss it. When I was involved in campaigning against the IRA, I was completely opposed at the same time to Section 31 of the Broadcasting Act, which prevented Sinn Féin and IRA members from speaking on RTE. I was completely opposed to those people within the peace movement that didn't want to discuss things with members of Sinn Féin, that didn't want to debate with members of Sinn Féin. I think it's really important, no matter how bad you think the other person is or the other group is, you should be open. First of all, you should certainly allow them to discuss their own things privately, and I think you should also be open to discussing things with them and trying to change their minds, being open to the idea even that they might change your minds in certain circumstances on parts of the issue without going against your fundamental ethical foundational beliefs. There might be some things that you're not aware of that they're aware of. So I think reason, conversation, are just vital, not only to maintaining democracy but to just human rights.
And then on the other part of that, then, about the LGBT society and the feminist society supporting the Islamist society in Goldsmith when they don't interrupt and disrupted Miriam's talk. Is there not something really wrong here when the very groups who are most under attack by Islam...
I found that very, very disappointing when I read about, obviously in particular, the LGBT group, and I read through their comments to try and understand to try and get a better sense of the reasoning, and they didn't really. Like you said, they identified the individual rather than looking at the content of what she was going to discuss, and then a number of people within the university, I think they were within the university, commented on the fact that she was going to be talking about how those particular groups are marginalised.
And it is, well, I mean, Mariam Namazi is one of the most both courageous and reasonable and ethical people that I know. The idea that, of all people, the idea that Mariam would be accused of hate speech.
But I think that the message that the LGBT society anyway we're using was, well, we're a minority, Muslims are a minority, we have to look out for them, and they'll look out for each other.
Yeah, but it's not even in terms of Mariam, the Muslims and the former Muslims who are persecuted by Islam. I mean, that's the minority that they should be looking out for, not the Muslims who have a place in a nice university in England.
And is this going back to conflating the issue with Islamophobia? That they felt they were protecting a minority from someone who was Miriam, who they saw as Islamophobic because she was daring to criticise them.
Yeah. And if you take it to in terms of the other example here, the more Irish example here of the Catholic school inviting me and then disinviting me on the basis that it would endanger the ethos of the school. I mean, all of these things.
That's quite a power, Michael.
It is, I know. Yes.
What you do with that power, yeah.
Actually, it doesn't really matter. You don't really most people don't believe it.
Yes, bring about ethical secularism one school at a time. But again, it's just down to being open to discussing ideas. We had during the marriage equality referendum, we had a debate which Ashling organised and chaired, where we had speakers supporting and opposing the referendum. We didn't just have a rally where we said, this is what we think, listen to us and do what we say. We brought speakers on both sides and let them tease out the discussion between themselves, and then just let the cards fall where they fall in terms of how people react to it. But I mean, democracy depends on our willingness to enable people to express their opinions.
I'm just going through. Someone is just bringing up. Is this just an issue with this so-called regressive left? Is that what we're dealing with here? It's and I'm not sure. This term seems to be quite new. This regressive left.
I've heard it most recently being used by Sam Harris, and I sometimes balk at terms that are inherently negative, and I'd rather deal with the issue on the head without necessarily using. Because I agree with you. Let's keep the language as clear and as meaningful and as understandable as possible. And I think maybe a term like regressive left just isn't particularly
It's also
helpful.
confusing here because left in America doesn't mean the same thing as left means here. Left in America essentially means what we would call liberal. And in terms of what we traditionally see left right here as in economic terms, virtually everyone in America, even those that would call themselves socialists, would probably be considered centre-right in European terms. So I think it's vague, it's confusing. It's probably useful to people in America who see the world through just American society and forget that they're talking on a worldwide global network.
Yeah, I think there is some merit to the argument that there is this unwillingness to criticise, which is what Michael's been speaking about all night. That let's have the conversation. Let's make a space where the conversation could be had, rather than trying to shout things down or close conversations down. And I think Sam has a point in relation to the very people you'd expect to be supporting that are now beginning to do some of that closing down. And they seem to be doing it. It seems to be coming from a misunderstood but well-intentioned position of trying to protect somebody. It's like they're running out and trying to find someone to protect.
I think sometimes it's closer to the political equivalent of unfriending somebody on Facebook.
Really? That they just
say, I have nothing to do with that.
All right.
Keep that away from my reality.
Right.
Don't let that reality intrude on my reality.
So perhaps maybe I'm being too generous. Maybe it is a little bit more. Well, maybe not sinister, but
well, I think as in all things, there will be people who are coordinating it, and there will be people who are going along with it. And I think the people who are going along with it are probably closer to what you're talking about, and the people who are coordinating it are probably closer to what I'm talking about.
Fair enough.
Just on that point then, I suppose one of the last issues that was raised is, speaking of coordinating things, and that there is a sense out there that there is a campaign, a coordinated campaign against feminists at the moment, and that part of this campaign is to try and get videos like the one of Big Red, feminists acting in a counterproductive way, and use them as examples of, and under the big umbrella of, this is what feminism is, all feminism is bad, look at what they're doing, let's just mock them, laugh at them, and that somehow Richard has now bought into this narrative and is now part of this narrative, that it is a coordinated campaign against feminism.
Well, if it was, well, first of all, that's nothing to do with atheism. That issue was to do with feminists and men's rights activists in Canada. It has nothing whatsoever to do with atheism. Secondly, I mean, I remember we had a World Atheist Congress in Dublin. I can't remember how long ago, 2011. And one of the things that happened there is there were some Muslims who came to, or some Islamists, Hamzat Sortis and some of his colleagues, and they were they had a table there. Well, actually, they bought tickets and they came to it, so we were happy to
Take
put
their money.
put their dawa money to some use. But they effectively doorstopped Richard when Richard was coming out of the hotel with their cameras to interview him, and they were seeing this is an opportunity for us to embarrass Richard Dawkins and put it on our YouTube channel. And at the same time, while that was happening, there were atheists who saw this happening and said, well, we'll video this because it'll be an opportunity for us to embarrass Hamza and put him on our YouTube channel. So everybody thinks that, when they're and we'll try to do that. That's not unusual, and particularly if it's the case where they're videoing people who have come to their conference. I don't see how you could call that coordinated.
Okay.
If we have time for one last topic of discussion, it's something that's been in the news recently, that I'd like to just ask your ideas on, because I'm not sure if my ideas are right on this, and I really want to get it right. I think there's probably a right answer to this. Anyway, the topic in question is Asher's Bakery. And I don't mind if we're not even talking about the specifics of Asher's Bakery, because it's a question that's been in my mind since I heard the first bakery gay wedding story from the States, I think maybe not last year but the year before. And I think it's an important question. I think it is to do with freedom of expression, and I have found myself disagreeing with a lot of views that have been expressed. I know Fintan O'Toole expressed a view, and I thought he got it completely wrong. I know members of the LGBT community who would support Asher's Bakery, and I wouldn't have. I think the right decision was made. Not that I think other solutions couldn't have been found for it. I definitely think that's the case. But so maybe if I could explain to you what I'm thinking, and then I'd just love to hear what you guys think about it.
I'm assuming everyone knows what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So just the basics of it is that a guy who's involved in LGBT activism went to Asher's Bakery, which is, on its website, says it is a Christian bakery. They don't seem to say they're not a Christian bakery, as far as I know. We can double check the website,
right.
But I think at the time they had said that they worked under a Christian ethos, and asked them to bake a cake, which they had no problem with, but he asked them to put some sort of marriage equality slogan on the cake.
Yeah.
Is this the gist of it? And they refused.
Yeah. No.
Because it went against their Christian ethos.
Yeah. I wasn't aware that actually they had identified as a Christian bakery.
They may or may not. Sorry, we might have to double check that. My understanding is that they are known as a religious family.
Well, that's an interesting question.
So, I mean, can you have a Christian bakery?
Yeah,
can a bakery be
this is precisely my point, or maybe the point that I'm going to make now. And as I said, I'd love to hear your views on it. I have I suppose, a very Republican with a small or interpretation of how commercial entities should operate, given an economy that is created and supported by a republic for all of its citizens. And that is that the companies are there to provide the service for everyone. They don't get to decide that they will or will not provide the service to one group of people or another, which I actually don't think is the issue here. They have said themselves they weren't refusing an issue or an order from a gay person or whatever else. And I'm just, on the face of it, going to assume that that's true. So that's one thing, and as I said, I think there's some conflation there, and I think legitimately that they weren't trying to discriminate. Or well, I don't know if they were legitimately trying to discriminate, but anyway. The second issue then, or the issue that I think is of importance is, and I know it's on a cake, but the right to censor information is, I think, the very heart of this. Well, for me, I think it is the very heart of the matter. Does certainly a printer have the right to decide that they will only print a manifesto or brochure or a book, whatever it is, on the conditions that they find it acceptable? And I would argue that no, they cannot. If they are a printer service providing a service to the community, then they don't get to be also the censor. And I suppose it's a slippery slope argument, and they're not great arguments to make, but the slippery slope argument is if every printer of the town or the community or the state or whatever decides they won't print a Fine Gael leaflet or an LGBT leaflet or an atheist leaflet, now we're in a situation where printers are being able to prevent people from accessing a service that is being protected for the entire community by the taxes of the entire community and by the laws of that community. So I suppose I was extending that thinking in relation to messages, whether they be in delicious cake format or not, and that I think on those grounds, irrespective of the deeply held beliefs of anyone on any topic, should they be required to fulfill the order if so. The Christian bakery actually changes things a bit, because I don't think, for example, Veritas should be forced to sell porn. I think if you've decided that you're a bookshop that only provides a particular type of service and that's well advertised in advance, then I think it's a different matter. But
then it comes back to is there such a thing as a Christian cake?
Yeah. I'm not sure there is. But anyway, look, that's what I think. But I'm very, very open to completely changing my mind on this. So I'm interested to hear your views on it.
Well, I love the fact that we live in a world where you can seriously use the phrase "the first gay marriage Christian bakery incident." it's like
on the island.
Globally. I'm trademarking that.
Yeah. It's like in Father Town. No. The other Father Shepherd, Windy Henderson. So yeah, I mean, I've actually changed my mind a few times on that as well. Yeah. I mean, it is quite a complex issue. It's quite an interesting issue, because my first instinct was no, they shouldn't have been allowed to. They shouldn't have been allowed to refuse to do it. That was my first.
They
instinct.
should have been. Allowed.
No, they shouldn't. They should have been forced to make the cake.
With the message.
With the message. Yeah.
It's the message that's the problem.
That was my first instinct. Yeah. And then I thought, no, actually, I'm just being prejudiced there, because I'm just going with my own side. Yeah. Because when I thought no, they shouldn't be forced to publish something that goes against their conscience. Was my next change of mind, and I'm now kind of shifting towards that the business doesn't have a conscience, even if they call it a Christian bakery, the business shouldn't have the right to refuse to do it. But if there are individuals within the business who say, well, I don't want to do that because it's against my conscience, they should get somebody else within the business to do it instead. So I mean, but that's an internal matter for the business if they want to protect some of their employees from having to do it. But I don't think that should be. I don't think that should be enforced by law, but I think that it should be something within the business that if they have an individual, if they want to protect individual employees, as long as they are still able to fulfill the service, then I think that's probably closer to how it should be addressed.
I think there has been a conflation between the business, which I agree, like you, businesses don't have rights, or well, businesses do have rights, but in a very limited capacity. They don't have beliefs. And I think there's a difference between the business and the business owners who have a dual relationship. They're people, and being forced and having the owners of Ash's Bakery or anyone else forced to sign a document or do something, or indeed if they were as employees of the business doing the cake themselves, I would agree then maybe if the business wanted to do some internal matter to alleviate that concern, not a problem. But if the business itself is there to provide the service, then the business doesn't get to decide this order we will fill and that we won't, based on the beliefs of those who happen to be the legal owners of it.
There's another factor that hasn't really been, I don't think it's really been taken into account properly, which comes more from the sort of restaurant area than the bakery area normally, is don't annoy people who are preparing food for you.
And ultimately I would have, because I don't know what was in that cake then, or what would be in that cake that if someone was forced to bake it. So, but I'm sorry, Ashling, you were going to say something.
On your last point there, I kind of took an intake of breath. Just, you're arguing for conscience clauses, and they are, to use that word, so problematic. We know, to use an example, the morning after pill. The pharmacists in Ireland have an opt-out on the basis of conscience that they don't have to sell the morning after pill. And we know how problematic that is for women who live in a small rural area. There's one chemist, and that chemist refuses to sell the pill that because of their conscience clause. We know that if we ever have abortion in Ireland, that it will be so difficult to find people who will carry them out because they will all opt out on conscience clauses. We won't have nurses or doctors who are willing to. So part of me is thinking, no, it's your job. Just do your damn job.
And if
you don't like it, change jobs.
That's certainly the line that, in fairness to him, and I don't say this often, Dermot Ahern, when approached in relation to the conscience clause for the civil partnership, the argument being made was we can't have some civil servants opting out of it and some
there is a distinction there. Again, there's so many nuances. There's a distinction there between somebody doing something on behalf of the state and somebody doing something as a citizen in their private business. But even so, I do think that if you are entering into the marketplace, we do have equality laws that do apply to private businesses. But I do think if you can, while still fulfilling your order, if you can work your own internal business procedures so that somebody who is particularly doesn't want to do it didn't have to do it if there's someone else there that can do it, then that would solve any legitimate problem that was there.
But I don't think that was the issue that Ashers were having. I don't think it was a case of none of their staff were willing to decorate the cake. I think it was the business owners, the family who run the business themselves, who met, because the order was taken, if I remember correctly. The order was placed, the instructions had been given, and then they contacted him afterwards to say that they had changed their mind and weren't going to. So the person at the counter took the order in. So it didn't seem to be a problem with the staff. It seemed to be the business owners themselves.
So then, as I said, I do think that this seems to be a question of private businesses and whether or not they're allowed to censor. And as I said, I think my gut instinct is no, they're not allowed to censor. But I don't know. As I said, I think there's been a lot of red herrings, I think. And I see it every time, and I do read almost all articles that I can see where the Ashers are putting forward their point of view, because again, I am willing to change my mind on it and I want to hear what else they have to say, but they've actually seemed to have repeated the same thing again and again and again, and they keep saying our beliefs, and they're talking about the couple. And again, I come back to irrelevant. The company is not you. You are not the company. The company doesn't get to express. It's not an extension, irrespective of private funding. The company doesn't have the right to be an extension of your beliefs. There's no legal basis, and I don't think there's ever been a legal basis.
Well, in Irish law, you're not allowed. In terms of provision of services, you're not allowed to discriminate on any of the 9 grounds. But you are. There isn't an exception if you're a religious organisation. But then, can you be a Christian bakery? You know?
Well, yeah. Well, see, this. As I said, I was kind of thinking of Veritas, and could Veritas be, if Veritas, let's say Veritas offered some sort of service where they'd be willing to buy in a foreign publication, and let's say that was the nature, that was how they described and advertised the service. And if someone came in and said, sure, well then will you bring in Playboy or something like that, and they said, well no, obviously because of our Christian beliefs. To me, I wonder if the law would support Veritas' position precisely because it first and foremost advertised that it is a Christian bookshop. But again,
that's a slightly different thing, because you're talking about selling something.
Well, that's true. As opposed to maybe.
You can't insist that your book is in Hodges Figgis or Waterstones.
No, that's true. That's true. So you're right. Perhaps
if you were talking about a printer, if you're talking about somebody who's just, or a photocopier, if you were talking about, if I went down to Reed's photocopiers on Nassau Street and said I want to photocopy this, and they looked at it and said, no, you can't. We're not going to allow you to photocopy that.
And that to me was my reaction in relation to the message not being allowed on the cake. That's what was happening, and I didn't think then they would have that the bakery as a commercial entity had no right to do that, and that everything else then was red herrings or conflating the issue, that the personal beliefs of the owners were just irrelevant.
Because you're probably biased because you bake cakes.
Yes, I am very biased because I bake cakes. I have never put any kind of messages in it. I don't know. I'll try and put a Leviticus a Leviticus quotation on my devil's food cake, which I think could be kind of slightly ironic.
I don't know if you saw just while we're talking about this, Peter Tatchell actually changed his mind on this issue. Just his quote here, he said, as much as I wish to defend the gay community, I also wish to defend freedom of conscience, expression and religion. In my view, it is an infringement of freedom to require businesses to add the promotion of ideas to which they conscientiously object. Discrimination against people should be unlawful, but not against ideas. The lawsuit against the bakery was well intended. It sought to challenge homophobia, but it was a step too far.
There's at least 5 things wrong with that first paragraph. And when I read Peter Tatchell's support of it, it was also clearly identifiably incorrect. Because, he's making the assumption that one should support the gay community. It's irrelevant. If the gay, again, I go back to my mathematical training, take out the case for n equals 1 and go to the nth case and look at this from any other perspective. And the issue is businesses don't have beliefs, businesses don't get to censor messages. Is the business essentially a printing service? And so he doesn't address those points in either of his positions. So... And this is what I felt what I had an issue with Fintan O'Toole's argument. And I usually like to read some of Fintan O'Toole's stuff. I think sometimes he hits the nail on the head. In this case, I think he hit his thumb and then his head with the hammer, because he certainly didn't seem to be thinking very, I was going to say straight, but anyway, that's another issue. But anyway, well, look, thank you very much for your considered thoughts on that.
Did we help muddy or make muddier? Because if we made muddier, job done.
Well, I think you've helped clarify my position, but I'm still willing to listen to someone else to try and change my mind on it. I still do think it is a censorship issue. It just happened to be, as I said, in cake form.
But it will be interesting to see what the appeal. I think the appeal's been held back now.
Is it?
Yeah, I think that's the latest on it, that the court case has been adjourned.
And on that note, I'm just actually hungry for cake now.
All I've learned from this evening is I like cake.
We like cake. Excellent. Well, listen, first of all, I want to thank you very much, Michael, for coming in and having a fantastic discussion and I hope we'll be able to get you in again.
Thanks for inviting me.
Well, that's brilliant. And thank you so much, Ashling, my new co-host.
Come back, Rob.
Yeah,
Come back,
God.
we miss you.
No, you were so much quieter. No, I don't think quiet and Rob have ever been
That's
used
my
in the same
radical
sentence.
feminism going ahead, I think.
Thank you so much for being here, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the year. I'm sure it'll be a very, very exciting one. So
can I just add that I remember when Ashling did her first podcast.
You don't dare take credit for anything now.
Ashling did her first podcast as a guest. I remember saying to her, "You'd be a great podcast host."
Well,
look, I can't even have that. Credit has to be taken.
It was quite prophetic. Was that a vision that you had?
You had a vision.
Yeah, in the middle of the night.
He thought it might get her away from Atheist Ireland for a while. Give us a break. Well, he's like, Ciarán, she's your problem now.
Actually, I'm beginning to realise now how this has all been just engineered to have me take you off his hands. Well, thanks very much for listening, and we will definitely have another podcast in within the next month, very soon. All right, Ashling doesn't want me to be too committal on that. So thanks very much. And if you have any comments or questions, please definitely post them on our Facebook page, our YouTube comment section, which is generally quite quiet, or indeed on Twitter. And we will catch you next time.
This looks like imprisonment. What's worse is that the prisoners don't know that they're prisoners. Even defend the tactics that are used to imprison them. A conquered mind, trying to conquer other minds, selling. Come out here, all about you, but this looks like imprisonment.